Excellent.
Permission granted.
Thank you. All right. Today's a special day. Today is Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan. Chodesh Cheshvan. Beginning of the new month. Rosh Chodesh is always a special day and a holy day. Wouldn't necessarily call it a festive day. And not that it's not festive, but the term festivity, according to Torah, is usually really reserved to Yom Tov, maybe Shabbos to a degree. So it's a special day, but it's also a turning point. And if I may, I remember I spoke about this last year at my Shabbos speech. So if any of you were there and awake at the time, you don't have to continue listening. But the point that I think is that there may not be a more drastic change, spiritual change in the Jewish calendar as there is when we transition from Tishrei to Cheshvan. Tishrei to Cheshvan is the ultimate transition of one energy to another. Tishrei is a month filled with mitzvahs, filled with holidays. There's no real even close second to it. The Rosh Hashanah, you got Yom Kippur, you got Sukkot, you got Simchas Torah. You're dancing, you're laughing, you're crying, you're praying, you're connecting, you're fasting, you're eating. I mean, it's everything. You're shaking. It's a month that is packed with spiritual energy, and really, it just gets better. You know, we conclude with Simchas Torah, which has such festive energy to it, and then we move from that holidays, from that month filled with mitzvahs, and we go to which month? To a month of Cheshvan, which is actually called Mar Cheshvan, the bitter Cheshvan. And why is it called the bitter Cheshvan? What makes it bitter? So what makes it bitter is that's the 1 month of the calendar which has no holiday in it. You know, we think of holidays, we think of the big ones. Really, every other month has some holiday. Hanukkah spans between the months of Kislev and Teves, which are the next 2 months. Shvat has the 15th of Shvat, Tu B'Shvat. The other already has Purim, Pesach, and you have the Pesach Sheni and Lag BaOmer and Iyar, siblings, the giving of Torah. It's just we have festive days throughout the year, and we go from the month filled with holidays to the month with no holidays. And furthermore, we're kind of entering the winter months. So there's that energy too. There's the sense that we're leaving the warmth of summer and the joys of summer and now entering the grind of winter and the cold of winter. So it is a I believe, fair to say, the biggest transition of the Jewish calendar is when we go from Tishrei to Cheshvan. And one of the messages we have to lift us up is the Torah portion of Noah, in which God basically says to Noah, there's a storm coming, and there's waters, and there's going to be turbulence, and there's going to be challenges. It's almost as if God is talking to all of us as we enter the winter months. And then God says, but before you get too concerned and you worry that you will be washed up in the storm, I am giving you something to build for yourself to create that protective energy. And not only protective energy, you know, we think of the Teva, the ark. Teva actually means a box. But if you think of the ark that Noah built, it was, I guess, first and foremost, an entity which gave protection to the Jewish people, to Noach, the Jewish people, Noach and his family. But it also tells us that the energy inside the ark was that of Gan Eden. That inside the ark there was it was the Garden of Eden. That was the energy that permeated inside the ark. So applying that to ourselves, God says, yes, there's water, there's turbulence, there's challenges ahead, but I'm giving you an ark that you can climb into. And the ark, what is that ark? The ark, as the sages tell us, the word teva is also the Hebrew word for words. Teva means words. And the ark that we all can build for ourselves are the words of Torah and the words of tefillah, the words of prayer and the words of Torah. And those are always available to us. We always have the prayer book. We always have the different books of Torah that we can read and really climb into. And when I say climb into it, I mean, there's a difference between davening or learning and it's done in a way that is somewhat half-hearted versus davening and learning in a way that you climbing into it. You really You're leaving the all distractions behind for however long it is. Maybe it's 10 minutes, maybe it's an hour, but during this period of time, you're really climbing into the ark, and you're not letting, and we live in a very distracted world. It's very easy to be sidetracked, but you do so by climbing into the ark. Then you maximize the protection and the holiness that the ark of prayer and Torah provides. So that's with regards to the time we're in and the Torah portion of the week. With that, let's jump into some of the actual text as we've been doing. I don't know when we started this class. I don't know if we've gone through the entire cycle of Torah and the Pardes series. Maybe not, but we're certainly making good progress. And so, as we do each time, we focus on a certain section of the Torah portion, and I've chosen not the first aliyah, but the second aliyah. And let's go through some of the text of the second aliyah of the parsha. It's also the beginning of chapter 7 of the book of Genesis, the book of Beraishis. The Torah portion is called Noah. And here's what we got. Chapter 7, verse number 1. This is after Noah built the ark. We have the first 22 verses of the parsha are chapter 6. Not exactly the first 22 verses, I'm sorry. I should say the first 14 verses are chapter 6, in which we are introduced to Noah and to his family and told how the generation was wicked, and God tells Noah to build an ark. And now the ark has been already built, and took 120 years to do so. And at this point, it is showtime. Now it's time for to put the divine plan into action. Chapter 7, let's read from the text. Am I sharing the screen? I have not. Okay, so let's share screen. Okay, here we are. And chapter 7, verse number 1. And God says to Noah, Bo'ata b'chol beischa el hateva, ki oscha ra'isi tzadik lefanai b'daraseh. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly go through some of the verses. Then we'll come back and we'll study Rashi and some of the other commentaries on it. Some of the mystical commentaries, including a fascinating Chizkuni commentary that I came across today about the first time in history. If next time somebody asks you, when is the first time in history that we had an automatic door, right? You go to the hospital or a hotel or something and the door opens up for you. What is the first automatic door in history? Well, today you're going to hear an answer you probably have not heard before. And that is, come, you and your children and your family should come to the Teva, because I saw you to be righteous in this generation. Verse number 2. We call it behema tahora. From all clean animals or pure animals, you should take 7 pairs. Umina behema asher lo torahi. And from the animal which is not pure, it says clean, but it means pure. Really, the Hebrew word is pure, which means kosher. Shnayim ish v'isha. You should take 2. Shnayim ish v'isha. Now, okay. Verse number 3, Gameof Hashamayim, from the fowl of the heavens, Shiva Shiva, 7 pairs, Zachor Nekeva, Lachayazer al Pnei Kala Aretz, to keep seed alive in the face of the earth so that the animals will continue to exist afterwards. Verse number 4, Ki liyamim od Shiva, because in another 7 days, Anochi mamtir al Aretz, I will bring forth rain onto the earth, Abarim Yomer, Abarim Laila, 40 days, 40 nights. And I will destroy all that which is left. Now, this verse should bring to question 2 things. Why did God have to wait 7 more days? Why does God have to wait 7 days? And if it was necessary to take place 7 days later, so why doesn't this conversation happen 7 days later? Why does God give this 7-day notice? It doesn't take 7 days to enter the ark. And why did the flood last 40 days and 40 nights? Does God not have the power to bring forceful rains to destroy that which needs to be destroyed in 2 days, 3 days? All right, so those 2 questions we'll get back to. Noach does as God commands. Noach ben sheish me'el shana. Noach was 600 years old in the Mabul al Aretz. Noach vanav Ishtel shevanav Ital Ateva. Noach and his children and his wife and the wives of his sons came to the Teva named Mehamabul due to the flood waters. Excuse me. Okay, I'm jumping ahead a little bit because I don't want to get too lost in each of the verses. We won't get to the other things. The rain, verse number 12 says 40 days, 40 nights. On this very day, Noach came, and Shem, Cham, and Yafes came as well as the children, them and all the animals, verse 14 says. Verse 15, Noach and all the animals came, male and female animals, and Veyiskar Hashem ba'ado, and the ark was shut. That's the entire section, the first 16 verses of chapter 7 in the story of Noah. Before we continue, does anybody have any questions on the text that we just read? Any questions or comments?
So I have a question. I've noticed that, and this is obviously on purpose, but like the Torah mentions that Noah and his family goes into the ark several times, and that the rain comes down and the flood happens several times. And I recall like going through the parsha, and you when you read something, you kind of visualize it in your mind, and you have like images, and it was kind of messing with me because I envisioned, okay, like it started to rain, and then Noah goes into the ark, and then the flood comes, and then Noah goes into the ark, and then he gathers the animals, and then the flood comes, and then Noah goes into the ark. I'm like, wait, right. Did he like go back in and out? Like what's going on?
and you can see Rashi addresses what you're saying. It does seem to repeat itself a few times, and it seems, and as Rashi says, each time it talks about Noah going in, it's teaching us something else about him and about the situation. Hopefully we'll get to all of that, but that's a great point. Great observation. Now let's go back and see some of the text on this. Firstly, Rashi says, on the words ki oschara isi, for you I have seen to be a tzaddik. Verse number 1, for you I have seen to be a tzaddik. Says Rashi, now in the beginning of the Torah portion, when the Torah describes Noach, it calls Noach a tzaddik and a tamim. Both descriptions. Over here, God only mentions one description. Why only one description? So he says the reason is because from here we learn a very practical lesson. From here we learn that we tell part of a person's praise in his presence and all of it in their absence. So when you're speaking about someone, if they're there, it's considered to be appropriate to only share part of their qualities. And behind their back, so to say, that's when you can speak of all of their qualities. Unfortunately, often it's the other way around. And that is that in front of a person, we dishonestly flatter them. We're dishonest in our flattery when the person is there. And as soon as they walk out of the room, suddenly we've got a lot of negative to say. So here, the ideal way to do it is that in their presence, you should compliment them, but there's some sort of etiquette of not overly, maybe the reason is so as not to inflate their arrogance. I don't know. I'd have to I'm curious. Maybe I could look it up in the Medrash Rabbah as to what the reason is. But I think there's almost some logic, inherent logic to it, that when you're talking to a person, you don't overdo their qualities. But when they're not around, you can certainly extol their virtues to a much greater degree. Okay. However, this is what Rashi says. The Zohar has a less flattering understanding of this verse. Look at these words. I see you to be tzaddik lefanai bador hazeh. You are a righteous man before me in this generation. Is that a compliment? The words in this generation, is that a compliment, the words in this generation, or is it perhaps a subtle rebuke? So the Zohar says like this. Amar Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda said, at that time, Ba'osashah, at that time, when God was preparing to destroy all the wickedness and all the wicked people, God searched the entire world, and could not find a single person who can serve as protection for their generation, for that generation. Gemara says, V'im Tomar, the Mizar continues, V'im Tomar, if you're going to say, V'harei Noach, how can you say there was no one there who could protect the generation? After all, there was Noah. The Gemara, so it says the Zohar, no, despite the fact that Noah was righteous, he was not righteous enough to protect his generation. And he was not righteous enough to have built a community of believers and built a community of righteous people. The fact that Noah was unable to protect his generation is a real, is considered to be a shortcoming of his. And that's why he says in this, that's the Zohar says, that's the meaning of these words. Sadik lefanav hadar hazeh. You are the one righteous person for me in this generation. But in other generations, there are going to be people who are righteous enough to accomplish more in the two senses. And they're connected, but in two senses. One is that their righteousness will be sufficient to protect their generation. And secondly, that their righteousness will cause others to join on board. Like, most famously, Avraham, who lived 10 generations later. And often we see Noach and Avraham compared, and Avraham was able to accomplish that which Noach cannot. Now, we can't put down Noach, God forbid, someone who the Torah describes as righteous and as perfect. Tamim means perfect. But his righteousness and perfection were limited to himself. And they did not have sufficient impact on the generation and were not enough to protect his generation. Abraham is not the only one who says about protect the generation. We find the same thing about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. It says Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the author of Zohar, also his holiness cast a protective net on his whole generation. So that's the subtle message behind the words Bador Hazeh in this generation. Verse number 2. And here's another very important message. Mikol habehema tahora tikach lecha shiva shiva ish v'ishto. From the pure animals, you should take 7 of each kosher animal, 14 really of each, 7 male, 7 female. And then min habehema asher einena tahorahi, and the animal which is not pure, you will only take 2 animals. So let me start with let me share a couple thoughts on this again, which doesn't show up in the simple interpretation of the Torah. First is, and this is the commentary struggle with this. If we take the dimensions of the Teva, how does it manage to contain all of the animals in the animal kingdom? I mean, we know today how enormous, how big the animal kingdom is. So how can a Teva suffice? And the dimensions are described. How can a Teva suffice to hold that type of, that amount of animals? And different answers are given. Perhaps one classic answer is given by Ramban, who says this was miraculous. There's no other way to explain it. Obviously, the whole story is a miraculous story. The animals joining and the whole thing is miraculous. But he says one of the miracles was, in his words, miut hamafzik esamaruba, a small amount which contains a bigger amount. And the miracle was that a small space contained and was able to hold an amount of animals which does not make sense. That's it. Ramban says it's a miracle. You have other commentaries in the Torah there are some commentaries in general. As you study them, you'll see some commentaries are more. Everyone agrees that the Torah includes miraculous events. There's no doubt about it. And everyone agrees that many parts of Torah are much more natural and logical events. But there are some commentaries which you see lean towards the more miraculous, and therefore, if there's a story which took place, and some commentaries will immediately jump to a miraculous understanding of it, and others would like to take a more philosophical or logical, scientific approach to it. Okay, again, according to every interpretation of the Torah, there are many miracles. The question is, those areas which the Torah doesn't clearly say it was a miracle, do we immediately assume it's a miracle or not? So the Ramban has a mystical take in general, so therefore the Ramban says this is miraculous. There are others who try to find natural ways to explain what took place, and I came across a couple explanations. One today, which is interesting, is that I think this may be from the Even Ezra. He says, the Ran actually, Rabbi Nissim of Gerona. He says that Noah took baby animals. So when we see according to the Ran, all the pictures you see of the ark are wrong. I mean, there's many reasons wrong, but it's wrong because Noah took the babies, fledglings. So he took the tiniest newborn of all the animals, which takes up much less space and also is much easier to maintain. Says it was newborn animals. Thereby, he also felt that if I have newborn animals or young animals, then the likelihood of them living longer afterwards and therefore producing more offspring is more likely. And therefore, that's how the Ran gives a more logical explanation of how they could all fit. They were newborn animals or baby animals, which allowed him to contain it. There's other answers given that maybe there were other floors, even though the Torah describes 3, maybe the Torah is only describing 3 of the many floors. Some say the table was a lot larger than we initially think. Either way, that's one idea which is shared. But another idea about this verse, which is very important, is as follows, and very practical. If there's any idea which is a practical message that you can take home with you immediately, it's this. The Talmud says this. From this verse number 2, we learn an important rule about how to talk. And that is that one should avoid using negative terminology. Is negative terminology a sin? Is it sinful? We're not talking about lashon hara, which is gossip. We're not talking about sheker, which is lying. Is it sinful just to give negative descriptions to something which is negative? So the answer is not sinful. It's not a sin, but the Torah discourages it. By way of example, the Torah says, if you could avoid using negative terminology, you should. Now, you have to describe a situation, that's fine, but use it with as few negative words as possible. And the proof to that is right here. What is the opposite of the word tahor, which means pure? There's a word for that. That word is tameh. So if I were to say this verse to you, in Hebrew, the natural way to say it would be, God said, from the tahor animals, from the pure animals, you should bring 7 of each, or 14 of each species. And from the tameh animal, from the impure, the defiled animal, you should bring only 2. But that's not what the Torah says. It doesn't say umin habehema hatmeya. It says umin habehema asher einena tehorahi, which is much longer than the word asher temeyahi. Lo tehorahi is significantly longer than the words temeyahi. The fact that the Torah doesn't say the animal which is defiled or impure. Instead, it says the animal which is not pure. Avoiding the word tameh, the Torah uses extra space to use positive terminology instead of negative terminology. And the Gemara says the Torah is teaching us a lesson. To the best of your ability, use positive words when describing situations, when describing things. And even if you have to describe something negative, instead of using the negative word, try to use it as by negating the positive. A person who lived up to this to the highest level was the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Rebbe used, whenever possible, the Rebbe used positive language instead of negative language. The Rebbe, instead of saying this person is bad, the Rebbe would say this person is not good or lacking in goodness. The Rebbe would avoid using the word death, instead saying lack of life. What in the words have power. Words have power. One of the Hayom Yoms of last week. Yom Yom is a for those who don't know, is a daily messaging that the Rebbe put together in the 1940s already, a booklet where every day is a little bit of a bit of wisdom. And last week, one of the days read as follows: that in the Baal Shem Tov shul there was a disagreement between two people. They got very heated until one of them yelled at the other one, "I'll tear you apart like a fish." Baal Shem Tov heard this, and he gathered his students around him, and he asked each of them to place their hands on the shoulders of their fellow. And then he placed his hand on the shoulders of those closest to him and created a circuit, a full circle. And as soon as he did so, the students started yelling because they all at the same time saw a vision of that person actually tearing apart his friend like a fish. And the idea that Baal Shem Tov was trying to convey to them is that every time you say something, your words, maybe not in the world or the realm that we see in front of us, they have an impact within a realm, they have an impact. So simply saying or threatening those words created that reality in some way or another. So our words have power. So the Torah says, if you can describe something, even if you have to describe a flaw, but you can do so without using negative words, without giving it a negative description, then one should try to do so. One fascinating example of the Rebbe was that the Rebbe would not use in English, when writing this, he would not use the word deadline. He wouldn't use the word, you have a deadline. The Rebbe would not use the word deadline. Why not? He says, why include death in something you have to get done? Why mention the word death? Instead, what word the Rebbe used? He said due date. It's the same thing. It's the same concept. If I have to get something done in 30 days, so 30 days is the due date, 30 days is the deadline. By saying due date, I'm including a positive concept of birth, of the beginning of something new, as opposed to death. So there's so many ways in which when you can use positive wording, this is something you can catch yourself every day numerous times, that when you can use positive wording, one should, instead of using negative wording. And certainly in a situation where the negative is a description of something, as the verse over here is stating. So that's us. I said, I'll just answer, I know we're out of time, I'll share one last point. This is from the commentary of the Chizkuni, and that is the very last words over here. Verse 16, that it was the male and female of all animals came, as God commanded, by Yiskar Hashem ba'ado, and the Lord shut him in. Says, what do you mean the Lord shut him in? He didn't shut the door? He didn't shut the door behind him? His mother didn't teach him manners? Why did he not shut the door behind him? Because he said Noach didn't want to shut the door. He didn't want to shut the door because Noach didn't know. How could Noach collect all the animals? You think he knew all of the animals of the world? He had no idea which animals were and which animals weren't. So therefore, Noach couldn't shut the door because he never knew when the final pair of animals had showed up. So therefore, only God, who knows all the animals, can shut the door. And therefore, the Chizkuni says, that's why it says, V'yiskar Hashem ba'ado. God closed the door because God knew, all right, this is the last two animals. I don't know which was the last one. Maybe it was A to Z, so the zebras came at the end. So God said this is the last animals have arrived, and now the door can be shut, and therefore this was the first automatically closing door in the history of humanity, was that God closed the door to the Teva. There you have something which I think it's unlikely you knew before. All right, have a great week, everyone. I very much enjoyed our study together. God willing, we'll continue our studies next week. Some of you may join me tomorrow night for our Talmud class. Be that as it may, Chodesh Tov, wishing you a month of blessing in all areas of your life.
Thank
you, Rabbi. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Rabbi. It was a great class.
Good to see you, Tana.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks, Rabbi.
You're welcome.
Shalom, shalom, Rabbi.
Be well, Moshe. Good to hear from you again.
Likewise, likewise.